"You're not real family." Margaret's words stung more than I expected. The Christmas lights flickered softly in the corner of the room, but it felt like the world had stopped when she spoke them. My daughter Sophia, only 8 years old, had been so excited to spend Christmas with the family. She had dressed in her best little dress, her brown hair styled neatly, eyes sparkling with hope. But that hope quickly shattered as my mother-in-law, Margaret, threw those words across the table, her tone cold and dismissive. My heart sank as I saw the hurt flash across Sophia's face. For a moment I stood frozen, not knowing how to react. How could Margaret say something like that, in front of everyone? My own mother-in-law, who I had tried so hard to please, was publicly rejecting my daughter, my child. I wanted to lash out, to defend Sophia, to scream that she was more than worthy of being part of this family. But I didn't. Instead, I watched, helpless, as my daughter's excitement turned into confusion, and the warmth of Christmas became a cold reminder of the rejection she was feeling. It was supposed to be a joyful day. The whole family had gathered, the table laden with food, the house decorated with the soft glow of Christmas lights. But it was all overshadowed by those words. Sophia's innocence had been shattered in an instant, and there was nothing I could do to take away the hurt that was now etched on her face. Margaret's words weren't just a slight against Sophia. They were a clear statement that, to her, my daughter didn't belong, didn't deserve to be part of this family. The very idea that my daughter wasn't real family was a dagger to my heart. My mind raced, trying to process what had just happened, but I couldn't understand it. How could Margaret say something so cruel, so callous, especially when we had been working so hard to blend our families? It felt like everything I had done to create a sense of belonging for Sophia had been undone in that single moment. Margaret was always difficult, always dismissive of me and my daughter. But this felt different. It felt like something deeper, something rooted in years of animosity. I had always felt like an outsider in this family, but I thought it was just me, just my insecurities. But hearing Margaret say those words out loud, seeing her dismiss Sophia like she was nothing, made everything clear. I wasn't just an outsider. Sophia was too. And that was something I couldn't ignore anymore. I glanced at my husband, Jake, sitting beside me at the table. He was silent, his face flushed with embarrassment. His gaze was locked on his parents, unwilling to speak up, unwilling to challenge the behavior that had been going on for years. I had always known that Jake had a complicated relationship with his parents, but this was different. He had always been the one to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation, and it had worked for years. But now it wasn't just about him. It was about Sophia. It was about me. And I wasn't going to let this go. I couldn't. "Mom," I said, my voice shaky but determined. That was completely uncalled for. Margaret turned to look at me, her face unreadable. "Don't try to defend her," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "She's not blood. She doesn't belong here." The words hit me like a slap to the face. She wasn't blood. It was like hearing someone say that your child wasn't really yours. Sophia wasn't blood, but she was my daughter. She was my world, my heart, and no one, not even Margaret, could take that away from me. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to break through. "Sophia is my daughter," I said, my voice steady despite the rising anger inside me. "And she is just as much a part of this family as anyone else." The room was silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Everyone was looking at me now, waiting for Jake to say something, but he didn't. He just sat there looking uncomfortable, his hands tightly gripping his fork. He wasn't going to stand up for me, not now, not ever. And in that moment I realized that I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, that I could keep tolerating the way his family treated me and my daughter. The truth was, Jake's family had never accepted me. And they certainly didn't accept Sophia. The moment I married him, I became an outsider. My daughter became an outsider. And no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I gave to this family, it would never be enough. I stood up abruptly, Sophia's small hand clasped tightly in mine. I wasn't going to let her sit through this humiliation any longer. "We're leaving," I said, my voice firm. Jake didn't even look at me. He didn't stop me as I grabbed Sophia's coat and led her out of the house. The air outside was cold, but it felt like a relief compared to the suffocating tension inside. As we walked to the car, Sophia's small voice broke the silence. "Mom, why don't they like me?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. My heart broke for her, for the innocent child who didn't understand why her grandparents rejected her. I knelt down, pulling her into a tight hug. "They're wrong, sweetie," I whispered. "You're perfect just the way you are. You belong with us, and I will always protect you." As I drove away from the house, I realized that this wasn't just about Margaret's hurtful words. This was about me finally standing up for what was right, about me finally realizing that I didn't have to keep tolerating the disrespect and rejection. I had spent so many years trying to make this family work, trying to please everyone, trying to fit in, but I couldn't do it anymore. And now I was ready to fight for my daughter. I was ready to make sure that no one ever made her feel like she didn't belong. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew that confronting my in-laws, challenging the way they treated Sophia, would create more conflict. But I also knew that I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. And so, as I drove away from the house, I made a silent promise to Sophia and to myself. I would fight for her. I would fight for us. And I wouldn't stop until she knew she was loved, respected, and valued, no matter what anyone else said. The car ride home was silent, except for the sound of the engine humming on the cold winter night. Sophia, sitting quietly in the back seat, stared out the window, her small hands clutching her coat. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, my heart breaking with every passing second. I knew she was confused, and I wished I could take away the pain she was feeling, but there was nothing I could say that would make it go away. The words Margaret had thrown at her echoed in my mind, each one like a slap to my face. "She's not real family." The idea that Sophia, my daughter, wasn't considered family by the very people who should have loved her unconditionally, had taken a toll on me. The injustice of it all hit me harder than I expected. How could Margaret say that about my daughter? How could she reject her so easily? I glanced at the empty seat next to me where Jake had been sitting moments ago. He hadn't said a word during the entire exchange. His silence had cut through me just as much as Margaret's words had. For years, I had dealt with the tension between us, the way his family treated me and Sophia like we didn't quite belong. But now I saw it clearly. He had never truly stood up for me, not when it mattered. Not when it was about protecting our daughter. He sat there, uncomfortable, avoiding the confrontation, and I realized then that his passivity was one of the reasons things had gotten this far. "I can't believe they said that," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't expecting an answer from him. Jake's silence was deafening, and the guilt started creeping in. We had been married for almost 10 years, but it felt like we were living in two completely different worlds. I had always tried to make his family work, trying to fit in and prove that I belonged. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. They would always see me as the outsider, and now they were treating my daughter the same way. I could feel the weight of the moment settling over me like a thick fog. I had to do something. I couldn't just let it go. Not this time. Not when it was affecting my daughter. I could hear the faint sound of Sophia's soft breathing from the back seat. I turned around to look at her, meeting her eyes through the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with sadness and confusion. It broke me to see her like this. "Sophia, sweetheart," I said gently, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm so sorry about what happened tonight. I want you to know that you are loved. You are so important to me and you always will be. Don't let what they said make you feel less than. You belong to me and I'm proud of you. Always." She didn't say anything, but I could see her eyes soften just a little, a flicker of comfort in them. I wished I could shield her from the harsh realities of the world, from the cruelty of people who should have been there for her. But I couldn't. All I could do was promise to fight for her, to protect her from the hurt that was so unfairly thrown her way. We pulled into our driveway, the headlights casting long shadows on the snow-covered lawn. I sat in the car for a moment, staring ahead, gathering my thoughts. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let my daughter feel like she wasn't enough, like she wasn't family. "Mom!" Sophia's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned around to look at her, meeting her eyes again. "What's going to happen now?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I sighed, my heart aching for her. "I'm going to make sure they know that you are family, Sophia. You will always be family. I'm going to make them see that." I meant it with every fiber of my being. No matter what it took, I would fight for her. I would not let her grow up thinking she wasn't worthy of love. I would make sure she knew she mattered not just to me but to the world. After we got inside the house, I tucked Sophia into bed, her small form curling up under the covers. I kissed her forehead and whispered again that she was loved, and that she would always be my family. She nodded, and her eyes fluttered closed, but I could tell she was still troubled, still uncertain. I lingered by her bedside for a moment, watching her sleep. She deserved better than this. She deserved a world where she was never made to feel less than anyone else. And I wasn't going to stop until I made that world a reality for her. The next morning I knew I had to confront Jake. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that his family's treatment of us was something I could overlook. I needed him to understand that this wasn't just about hurt feelings. It was about protecting our daughter. He had to choose a side. He had to choose us. As I sat across from him at the kitchen table, I could feel the tension in the air. Jake was avoiding my gaze, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his coffee cup. Jake, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. I need you to understand something. What happened last night wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just an awkward comment. They don't see Sophia as family, and that's unacceptable. I need you to stand up for her, for us. I can't do this alone anymore. He didn't say anything at first, and I could feel my frustration building. This isn't just about your family, Jake. This is about our daughter. She's not going to feel like she's unwanted. Not in our family. Not in her own home. Finally, he looked up at me, his expression conflicted. I know, he said quietly, but I don't know how to fix it. I felt a wave of anger and sadness wash over me. You start by standing with me. You start by making sure your family knows that they don't get to treat us like this. They don't get to hurt our daughter and get away with it. Jake sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. I'll talk to them, he said finally, though his tone wasn't as certain as I needed it to be. But it was a start. At least it was something. As I looked at him, I realized that I couldn't keep waiting for him to change everything. I couldn't keep hoping he would be the one to stand up to his family. It was up to me now. I would fight for Sophia. I would make sure she knew that she was loved, that she belonged. No matter what it took, I would never let anyone make her feel like she didn't matter. Not now, not ever. The days following that Christmas dinner were filled with a strange mix of determination and uncertainty. I spent most of my time trying to comfort Sophia, but I knew deep down that the pain she was feeling wasn't something I could just talk away. I wished I could shield her from the cruelty of the world, but I knew I couldn't. All I could do was promise to fight for her, to make sure she knew she was loved and valued. But as much as I wanted to focus on her, I couldn't ignore the fact that I had my own battle to fight. I had spent too long allowing my in-laws to dictate how I felt about myself and my family. The constant undermining, the dismissive attitude toward Sophia, it had all come to a head, and I knew I had to take action. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about protecting Sophia. This was about me too. I had been walking on eggshells for years, trying to keep the peace, trying to fit into a family that never truly accepted me. But now I was done. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness and my daughter's for the sake of keeping the peace. I had to draw a line. That's why the next morning I decided to make a call. I wasn't sure who I was more afraid of, my in-laws or the consequences of speaking out. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I wasn't going to let them continue to treat my daughter as if she didn't belong. I called a lawyer to discuss the family trust. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the trust, the very thing that was supposed to protect our family's wealth, was also the thing keeping us at arm's length. It was clear to me now that Margaret and Edward had always used it as a tool to keep control. It wasn't just about money, it was about power. And it was time for me to take that power back. I wasn't going to wait for Jake to do it for me. If he wasn't going to stand up to his parents, then I would. I had spent enough time waiting for someone else to fix things. It was time to fix it myself. The phone call with the lawyer wasn't easy, but it gave me a sense of clarity I hadn't had before. I knew that I couldn't fight this alone, but I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't afford to. This was about more than just the trust, it was about asserting my right to protect my family. After the call, I felt a mix of anxiety and relief. I had taken the first step, but I still had so much to do. I knew that confronting my in-laws would be difficult, but it was the only way forward. And then there was Jake. He still hadn't fully grasped the gravity of what was happening. He was still in denial about how deep the divide between his family and ours had grown. I knew he loved Sophia, but I also knew he wasn't ready to challenge his parents. I didn't want to fight him, but I also couldn't afford to wait for him to come around. I needed him to be on my side. So that night when we sat down for dinner, I decided to have a conversation with Jake. The tension was thick between us, and I could tell he was still uncomfortable about what had happened at Christmas. He hadn't really spoken to me about it. He'd just withdrawn into his usual silence. I wasn't going to let that continue. "Jake," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about what happened with your parents." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I know," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "I just don't know what to say." I let out a breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Jake, this isn't just about a bad Christmas dinner. This is about our daughter. It's about how your parents have treated her for years." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with guilt. "I know. I don't know what to do." "You need to make a choice," I said, my voice steady. "I can't do this alone. If you're not willing to stand up to them, then I will. But I can't keep pretending that everything is okay. We can't keep letting them treat Sophia like she's not part of this family." Jake was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I don't want to lose them." I felt a pang of frustration, but I tried to stay calm. "Jake, you're not going to lose them. But your daughter is being hurt. She's being rejected, and that's not something I'm willing to ignore." He finally met my gaze, and for the first time I saw the conflict in his eyes. "I'll talk to them," he said quietly. "I'll try." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what trying would mean. It wasn't enough for me to just try. But I had to take what I could get for now. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I focused on Sophia, doing my best to give her a sense of normalcy despite the tension between us and the family. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside me. I wasn't afraid to fight for her anymore. And I wasn't going to let my in-laws dictate how we lived our lives. The phone call came 2 days later. It was from Jake. "I spoke to my parents," he said, his voice strained. "They're not happy about it. But they said they'll make some changes to the trust. They're not going to disown you or Sophia, but they're still..." He trailed off, unsure of how to continue. "Still what?" I asked, holding my breath. "Still difficult. They don't want to completely give up control, but they'll make some concessions. It's not everything, but it's a start." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. It wasn't the victory I had hoped for, but it was something. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making progress. But it wasn't over yet. I knew there would be more battles ahead. But I was ready. For the first time, I was truly ready to fight for my family. The days after Jake's conversation with his parents passed by in a blur. I spent most of my time focusing on Sophia, trying to shield her from the weight of the situation. I wanted to make things right for her, but I could feel the tension building within me. Every day, I wondered whether Jake was truly committed to standing up for us, whether his words would actually lead to any meaningful change, or if we were simply prolonging the inevitable. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending that everything was fine, but I promised myself I would fight for Sophia. I couldn't just let her suffer in silence. The phone rang early one morning. It was Jake. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice sounding strained. "I've called my lawyer to get more details. About the trust." I felt a tightness in my chest. The family trust had always been a point of contention, and the idea that Jake was finally taking steps to address it gave me a sense of cautious hope. "What did they say?" I asked, trying to keep my emotions in check. "They'll revise it, but it's going to take some time," he said. "It's not going to be an immediate fix. They want to make sure it's done properly." I felt a wave of frustration. I wanted it fixed now. I wanted the changes to happen today, not in weeks or months. "I can't wait, Jake. I can't keep pretending like this is okay. Your parents have treated Sophia like she's not part of the family, and that needs to stop now." He was quiet for a moment. I know it's not right. I'm doing what I can." But his words didn't reassure me. They never did. I knew Jake wanted to believe things would just magically improve if he did enough. But the truth was he wasn't fully prepared to confront his parents. He wasn't ready to take the hard steps necessary to fix this. I had been ready for a long time. I'm not waiting around for them to decide how to treat us, I said, my voice growing more firm. I'm going to make sure Sophia is included. I'm going to make sure your parents know they can't just brush her aside. There was another long pause on the other end of the line. What do you mean? Jake asked carefully, like he was bracing for something big. I'm going to confront your parents, I said. I'm going to tell them exactly how I feel. I'm not going to let them keep treating us like this. They need to understand how much this hurts Sophia. How much it hurts me. They can't just disregard us because we're not their real family. I could almost hear Jake take a deep breath. Olivia, please don't do anything rash, he said. I don't want you to get hurt. I won't get hurt, I replied firmly. But I'm done staying quiet. I can't sit back and let them destroy our family. I hung up the phone and sat there for a few moments, letting the gravity of what I had just committed to settle in. Had spent years avoiding conflict, trying to keep the peace for the sake of our family. But peace was a lie. It was a facade I had built to protect myself, and it wasn't real. The only way forward was through honesty, through confronting the ones who had caused this pain. I knew there would be consequences. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I was prepared to face them. I wasn't just fighting for my daughter. I was fighting for myself, for our family's future. The next day I gathered my courage. I called Margaret in Edward's house, my heart pounding as I dialed the number. When Margaret answered, I could hear the surprise in her voice. Olivia? What's going on? She asked, her tone clipped. I need to talk to you and Edward, I said, my voice steady despite the nerves creeping up inside me. It's time to have a real conversation about how you've been treating Sophia. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Margaret's voice came back, low and defensive. I don't know what you're talking about. I could feel my anger rising, but I took a deep breath to calm myself. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said. The way you treated Sophia at Christmas, the way you've always treated her like she doesn't matter. That needs to stop. Margaret let out a short, derisive laugh. You're overreacting, Olivia. It's not that serious. It is that serious, I said firmly. Your words were hurtful, and the way you've excluded Sophia from this family. It's not something I can overlook anymore. She deserves to be treated with respect. She deserves to know she's loved. Margaret sighed heavily, as if she were done with the conversation already. I don't know what you want me to say, Olivia. You know how Edward feels about all this. I don't care about Edward's feelings, I snapped. This isn't about him. It's about my daughter. If you can't accept that, then I'll have to make sure you understand the consequences. There was silence on the other end of the line for a long time. Finally, Margaret spoke again, her voice softer but still dismissive. I'll talk to Edward. But I'm not making any promises. You don't have to make promises. You just need to start treating us like we belong. I hung up the phone, my heart racing in my chest. It was done. I had made my stance clear. The next step was to prepare for what would come next. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I knew my confrontation with Margaret and Edward would be just the beginning. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid to stand up for my family. I wasn't afraid to take back what they had taken from us. I would do whatever it took to make sure that Sophia knew she was loved, that she belonged, no matter what anyone else said. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. I tried to focus on my work to give Sophia some sense of normalcy, but I could feel the tension eating at me. I kept replaying the conversation with Margaret in my mind, her dismissive tone, the way she downplayed everything, as if the hurt she caused didn't matter. I couldn't let it go no matter how hard I tried. Every time I looked at Sophia, I saw that moment in my mind, her face so full of confusion and pain. It was like a weight I couldn't shake off. I had promised her I would protect her, but here I was feeling more powerless than ever. But then I remembered something my therapist had said during our last session. Sometimes you have to make a stand. You can't keep letting people walk all over you, especially when it involves your child. Those words echoed in my head as I sat in the living room, staring at the phone in my hand. I knew what I had to do. I needed to confront Jake again. This time it couldn't be a conversation about trying to make things work with his parents. It had to be a conversation about us, about the future of our family. If I was going to fight for Sophia, I needed Jake to be fully on board. It was time to stop waiting for him to take the lead, and to stop making excuses for his family's behavior. I had waited long enough. As I dialed Jake's number, my heart raced, but I also felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. The uncertainty was gone. I was done letting this situation fester. "Hey, it's me," I said when Jake picked up, my voice steady, but there was no mistaking the urgency in it. "I think we need to have a serious conversation. Right now." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then I heard Jake's voice, quiet and apprehensive. "What's going on? We can't keep going like this," I said, sitting up straighter, trying to steel myself. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine when your family continues to hurt Sophia. I'm done with their rejection. I'm done with you being silent. I need you to make a choice." There was another long pause, but this time I could feel Jake's hesitation. "Olivia, I don't know what you want from me. You want me to go against my parents? You know how that's going to end." "I don't care how it ends, Jake," I replied, my voice rising with frustration. "Your parents have already made it clear they don't care about Sophia. They don't care about me. They've made their choice, and now I'm making mine." The silence that followed was deafening. I waited, my pulse pounding in my ears, hoping Jake would finally understand. "I'm not asking you to choose between me and them," I said, softer this time. "I'm asking you to stand up for us. For Sophia. Because right now I'm the only one doing it. And I can't keep doing it alone." "Olivia." Jake's voice was laced with guilt, but also with a sense of resignation. "I know I've been avoiding this. I've been trying to keep the peace, but I see now that it's not working. I've been so focused on keeping my family happy, but I'm losing you. I'm losing us." His words, though full of regret, felt like a small victory. For the first time I saw that he understood. "I know, Jake," I said, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. "But we can't fix this unless we're both in it together. You need to confront your parents. You need to tell them that this is our family now. Not just their biological children, but me, you, and Sophia. We're all part of it. And if they can't accept that, then we need to move on." "Okay," Jake said after a long pause, his voice quieter now, more resolved. "I'll talk to them. I'll tell them that things need to change. But you're right. We can't keep going like this." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me for the first time in days. "This isn't going to be easy, but it's the right thing. And we're going to do it together. For Sophia." I hung up the phone, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time, I felt like I had Jake's support. It was a start, and sometimes that was all you needed to begin the hard work of rebuilding. The following days were filled with a quiet anticipation. Jake hadn't yet spoken to his parents, but I could feel him preparing himself for the conversation. I knew it wasn't easy for him. Confronting his parents, especially after all these years, would be difficult. But I also knew that if he didn't do it now, it would only get worse. The hurt would only grow. I wasn't going to sit back anymore and let them think they could get away with treating us this way. I was going to make sure they understood that I wasn't afraid of fighting for my daughter. One evening, just a few days after our conversation, Jake came home from work earlier than usual. He was quiet, his face set in a serious expression. "I did it," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "I talked to my parents." My heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" I asked, holding my breath. It wasn't easy. They weren't happy. But I told them that things needed to change. That they couldn't keep treating us like we didn't matter. And I told them that if they couldn't accept Sophia, then they didn't have a place in our lives. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My eyes welled with tears as I stepped forward to embrace him. "Jake, you did it. Thank you." "I wasn't sure how they would react," he continued, his voice strained. "But I knew it was the right thing. It wasn't perfect, but it's a start." We stood there for a moment, holding each other tightly, both of us overwhelmed with emotion. It wasn't the final resolution, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a partner in this fight. The following days were filled with more difficult conversations, but there was a sense of hope. We had made the first step, and I knew we couldn't stop now. We would fight for Sophia, for our family, and for the future we were determined to create. Together. The days after Jake's conversation with his parents were filled with a strange sense of uncertainty. On one hand, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had been asking for this for so long, hoping for him to take a stand, and finally he had. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. Jake had done his part, but I knew that this wasn't going to be an easy or quick resolution. His parents weren't going to change overnight. Margaret, especially, had made it clear in the past that she had a certain view of things, and I doubted she would simply accept our demands. I couldn't let myself be naive. I had to prepare for the possibility that things would get worse before they got better. As much as I wanted to believe that everything would now magically fall into place, I had to face the reality of the situation. The tension in our home was palpable, especially with Jake. He was trying to navigate between us and his parents, but he still hadn't fully processed what was at stake. He still wasn't entirely ready to sever ties with them if it came to that. I knew he didn't want to lose his family, but I also knew that he couldn't keep avoiding the truth. He had to make a choice. And soon. I spent the next few days trying to focus on Sophia, on making her feel secure despite the chaos that seemed to be swirling around us. I couldn't let her see me falter. She had already been through enough. But there were moments when I couldn't hide the weight of what had happened. When she asked me why her grandparents didn't love her, I felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. How could I explain this to her? How could I make her understand that it wasn't about her, that she was loved and valued, even if they didn't see it? I had to remind myself that I was doing this for her. I was standing up for her, and no matter how hard it got, I couldn't back down. We had to be strong. I knew the next step was confronting Margaret and Edward face to face. I had called them out once over the phone, but that wasn't enough. I needed to make them see how deeply their words and actions had hurt us. I needed them to understand that they couldn't just dismiss us. We were family too, and if they wanted to be a part of our lives, they had to accept us, fully and completely. I wasn't going to keep tiptoeing around their feelings. It was time to demand respect, but I wasn't sure how to approach it. I didn't want to start a war, but I also couldn't just let them continue to treat us like second-class citizens. I had to find a way to be firm without being hostile, to make them see the consequences of their actions without creating more unnecessary conflict. The night before I was planning to meet with them, I had trouble sleeping. My mind was racing, filled with all the possible scenarios of what might happen. I knew this meeting would be pivotal. This could either be the beginning of something new, or it could tear us apart even further. I tossed and turned trying to find some peace of mind. I couldn't. The reality of the situation was too overwhelming. The next morning I woke up early, determined to face whatever came next. Sophia was still asleep, her peaceful face a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I kissed her forehead gently before heading to the kitchen to prepare myself. Jake was already up, but he was still distant, his mind clearly preoccupied. He didn't say much as he made his coffee, and I could feel the weight of his unspoken thoughts hanging between us. I knew he was nervous about what was to come. He wanted everything to be okay, but he also wasn't ready to fully let go of his family. I didn't know how much longer I could wait for him to come around. This was something that had to be done now. Finally, we left the house, and the drive to Margaret and Edward's was eerily quiet. The tension in the car was thick, and I could feel the discomfort coming from Jake, but I also knew that he understood how important this was. We arrived at their house, and as I stepped out of the car, my stomach churned with anxiety. I had always dreaded these meetings, the constant feeling that I was walking on eggshells around them. But this time was different. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let them make me feel small anymore. We rang the doorbell, and when Margaret opened the door, she didn't greet us warmly. Her eyes were cold, and there was a tightness to her posture, as if she already knew what was coming. "Olivia," she said, her tone clipped. "Jake? Come in." We stepped inside, and there was an uncomfortable silence as we sat down in the living room. Edward was sitting in his usual chair, reading a newspaper. He didn't acknowledge us as we entered. I could feel my frustration bubbling up, but I kept my composure. I had to remain calm. "We need to talk," I said firmly. Margaret glanced at Edward, and they exchanged a brief look before she turned back to me. "What's this about Olivia?" she asked, her voice dripping with feigned politeness. I took a deep breath. This is about the way you've been treating Sophia. The way you've treated me. We're family, and you need to start acting like it. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. No, Margaret. Let me finish. I've been patient. I've tried to make things work. But I'm not going to sit here and let you make my daughter feel like she doesn't belong. She's my child, and you will treat her with the respect she deserves or we're done. The room fell silent. Edward slowly lowered his newspaper, finally looking at me. His face was a mixture of shock and disdain, but I wasn't backing down. We've had this conversation before, Olivia, he said, his voice low. You know how we feel about this situation. Sophia is not. Don't finish that sentence, Edward, I snapped. Because I'm done listening to it. Sophia's family. Whether you like it or not. And if you can't accept that, then we have no place here. You'll never see her again. Margaret and Edward exchanged another look, and I could see the tension in their eyes. They hadn't expected me to be so firm, but I wasn't going to let them control the situation anymore. I was in charge now. You're right, Margaret finally said, her voice tight. We don't like it, but we will make the necessary adjustments. We'll revise the trust. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had made them see that this wasn't just about money or family legacies, it was about respect. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had regained control over my own life. The next few days felt like a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. I had spoken up. I had confronted Margaret and Edward. They had agreed to revise the trust. It was a victory, but I knew it wasn't the end. I still had a long road ahead of me. It wasn't just about the trust, about money or assets. It was about respect. It was about showing Sophia that she mattered, that she was a part of this family, no matter what anyone else thought. But there was something nagging at me. Even though I had stood up to my in-laws, something felt unresolved. Jake still hadn't fully come around. I could tell he was trying, but he wasn't entirely there. I didn't blame him. He had been caught in the middle of a battle he never wanted. But I couldn't wait for him to be ready. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, waiting for him to decide where his loyalties lay. I had already waited long enough. One evening after dinner I sat down with Jake. We hadn't talked much since the confrontation with his parents, and I could feel the distance between us growing. It wasn't just about the trust or his family, it was deeper than that. It was about how we saw each other, how we saw our life together. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Jake, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady but firm. He looked at me, his brow furrowing slightly. What about? About us, I replied. About where we're headed. About Sophia. He exhaled slowly and nodded, setting his fork down on his plate. I know I've been distant. His voice was low, but there was something vulnerable in it. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to fix things between us, between me and my family. I felt a pang of frustration, but I kept my composure. You have to start by standing with me, Jake, I said, looking him straight in the eye. I can't keep doing this alone. I can't keep fighting for Sophia's place in this family if you're not with me. You need to make a decision. His eyes flickered with uncertainty. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us, he said quietly. But I also don't want to lose my family. But you're not going to lose your family by standing up for us, I said firmly. We're your family too, Jake. And if your parents can't see that, then they're the ones who need to change, not us. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze dropping to the table. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the pull between his loyalty to his family and his loyalty to me and Sophia. But he had to make a choice. He had to choose us. I'll talk to them again, he finally said, his voice quiet but resolute. I'll tell them that things have to change, that we're not going to keep living in this kind of tension. I'll tell them that Sophia is a part of this family, no matter what. My heart swelled with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. It was the first time I had truly felt like Jake was on the same page as me, that he was willing to put our family first. Thank you, I said, my voice soft. That's all I'm asking. Just stand with me. Stand with Sophia. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. I will, he said, looking me in the eyes. I promise. The next few days were filled with more tension as Jake prepared to speak to his parents. I could tell it wasn't easy for him. He didn't want to lose his relationship with them, but he knew this was something that had to be done. I admired his effort, but I couldn't help but feel frustrated that it had taken this long. I had already been through so much to fight for Sophia, and now it was his turn. I couldn't keep carrying the weight of this alone. But I also knew that this wasn't just about fighting for Sophia. It was about building a future where we were all treated equally. It was about creating a life where we weren't always walking on eggshells around his family, always trying to please them. The next time we saw Margaret and Edward, I knew things would be different. I had made sure of that. Jake had spoken to them. He had told them that the way they treated us, the way they treated Sophia, was unacceptable. And they had agreed to revise the trust. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation wasn't enough. I needed to hear it from them. I needed to know that they truly understood the consequences of their actions, that they wouldn't just say what I wanted to hear and go back to their old ways. When we arrived at their house, I was ready. I was ready to face whatever came next. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had already fought for my daughter, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. Margaret and Edward greeted us at the door, their smiles tight and forced. I could see that they were still uncomfortable, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. We need to talk, I said as we walked into the living room, my voice steady, about the changes to the trust. Margaret glanced at Edward, who didn't make eye contact. I could tell they were both uneasy. We've discussed it, Olivia, Margaret said, her voice cool. We're willing to make some changes. But you have to understand that this family has traditions, and we can't just throw them away. I don't want you to throw away traditions, I said firmly. I just want you to recognize that Sophia is part of this family. She always has been and she always will be. You don't get to decide who belongs and who doesn't. There was a long silence. Edward shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Margaret didn't respond right away. Finally she sighed, her expression softening slightly. We don't always know how to handle all of this, she said, her voice quieter. But we'll do better. We'll try. I nodded, my heart still heavy. Trying isn't enough. We need to see action. This has gone on long enough. Jake stood beside me, his presence a quiet strength. We'll do whatever it takes to make this work, he said, his voice calm but firm. But we need to see that you're truly committed to changing, to treating Sophia as part of this family. The conversation wasn't easy. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was progress. Margaret and Edward agreed to revise the trust, to include Sophia as a rightful heir. But I knew there was still work to be done. This was just the beginning. I was ready for the next step, whatever it might be. But for now, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. The following weeks were a mix of relief and anxiety. The revisions to the trust were slowly taking shape, but I knew it wasn't going to be as simple as just signing papers and moving on. The deeper issues, the hurt and the years of rejection, couldn't be solved so easily. Every time I saw Sophia, I was reminded of the weight she carried, of the scars left by the people who were supposed to love her. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about proving to her that she was worthy, that she deserved to be seen and loved for who she was, not for the circumstances of her birth. I spent my days doing my best to shield her from the ongoing tension, to fill her life with joy and comfort, but the truth was that nothing would ever be the same. I couldn't pretend otherwise. The confrontation with Margaret and Edward had given me a sense of power, but I knew that it was only the first step in a much longer journey. As much as I hated to admit it, I was still waiting for Jake to fully step up. He had promised that he would talk to his parents, that he would force them to recognize us, but I could tell that he was still holding back. It wasn't that he wasn't trying, but there was always this hesitation, this reluctance to truly sever ties with his family. I understood his desire to keep the peace, but I also knew that peace had come at too high a cost. I couldn't let Sophia feel like she was anything less than a full member of this family. She deserved better. One afternoon, as I was picking Sophia up from school, I got a text from Jake. It was short and to the point. I spoke to them again. They agreed to meet with us tomorrow. My stomach dropped. The time had finally come. I knew that Jake had done his part, but this time it wasn't just about the trust anymore. It was about setting boundaries, about making sure they understood that they couldn't keep treating us like second-class citizens. I was determined to make sure that Sophia knew she was loved, that she belonged. That night I sat with Jake in the living room, the tension thick between us. I could feel the weight of the conversation ahead. "Are you ready?" I asked, my voice steady but soft. He sighed deeply, his fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. "I think so. But I don't know what to expect. I don't know if they'll ever truly change." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the truth of his words. I had no illusions. I knew that Margaret and Edward weren't going to change overnight, but I also knew that I couldn't let them continue to treat us the way they had. "Jake," I said quietly, "this is about us. About our future. About Sophia's future. It's not just about their approval anymore. It's about making sure that we have the space we need to thrive, to be treated with the respect we deserve." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. "I know. You're right." The next day we drove to his parents' house, the air in the car thick with anticipation. Jake was quiet, his gaze focused on the road, and I could tell he was mentally preparing himself for what was about to unfold. I, on the other hand, was trying to remain calm, but my heart was racing. This conversation had the potential to change everything, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it. As we pulled into their driveway, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The house looked the same as it always had, grand, imposing, with perfectly manicured lawns and flowers in full bloom. It was the house of a family that had everything they needed, a family that had never had to fight for anything. But this time things were different. As we entered the house, Margaret and Edward were waiting for us in the living room. There was an awkward tension in the air, and I could see that they were both on edge. Margaret didn't offer a warm greeting. Instead, she nodded curtly toward the couch, gesturing for us to sit down. I could see the way she looked at me, like she was bracing herself for a confrontation. Edward, on the other hand, avoided eye contact altogether. His silence spoke volumes. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. "We've had enough of the games. Enough of the silent treatment. It's time for you to accept that Sophia is a part of this family." Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she didn't interrupt. She just watched me as if waiting for me to say more. "We're not asking for your approval," I continued. "We're not asking you to love us the way you love your biological children. We're asking you to treat us with respect. To treat Sophia as a full member of this family, not as some outsider who doesn't belong." Margaret opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. "No. We've heard enough of your excuses. We don't need to keep begging for your acceptance. We're not asking for your charity. We're asking for fairness. And if you can't give us that, then we're done. We're moving on." The room fell into a tense silence. Edward still wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the floor. Margaret's face was a mixture of frustration and disbelief, as if she couldn't quite process what I was saying. "Olivia," she said finally, her voice tight, "you don't understand. This isn't just about Sophia. This is about tradition. This is about what's been passed down for generations." I stood up, my voice rising in anger. "And I don't care about your tradition, Margaret. This is about family. Real family. Not some bloodline that you've been clinging to for years. We're family now, whether you accept it or not." For the first time, I saw something flicker in Margaret's eyes. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was anger, but it was something. She didn't say anything else, and for a long moment, the three of us just sat there in silence. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a resolution. But it was progress. We had made our stand. And that was enough for me. Jake and I left their house without a word. The ride home was quiet, but there was a subtle shift in the air between us. We hadn't solved everything, but we had taken the first step. For the first time, I felt like we were on the same team. And that, in itself, was a victory. I knew that there would be more battles ahead, but at least now we were ready to face them together. Days passed, and though things seemed calmer on the surface, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still standing on shaky ground. The confrontation with Margaret and Edward had been a turning point, but I knew it wasn't the end. I couldn't trust that they'd truly changed. It was clear that they were only agreeing to the revisions because they had no other choice, not because they genuinely understood the harm they had caused. I had to stay vigilant. I had to make sure they kept their word. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just fighting for Sophia anymore. I was fighting for the kind of future we deserved. A future where we didn't have to constantly fight for acceptance. A future where we could live without feeling like outsiders in our own family. I wasn't going to let them tear us down any longer. Jake seemed to be trying. I could see it in the way he was more present at home, in the way he started to take more responsibility for Sophia's well-being. But there was still hesitation. He wasn't fully committed to the idea of cutting ties with his parents, and I knew that if I wanted to protect our family, I would have to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't wait for him to be ready. I had waited too long already. It was a Saturday afternoon when I decided to take the next step. I had spent the morning with Sophia, playing games and talking, but in the back of my mind, the looming issue with my in-laws was always there. Jake had gone out to run errands, leaving me with some quiet time to think. The phone rang, and when I saw the caller ID, I knew it was time. Margaret. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello. I said, my voice steady but guarded. Olivia. Margaret's voice came through, still tinged with the coldness I had grown used to. I think we need to talk. About what? I asked, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. About the trust, she replied quickly. We've made the revisions you asked for. But I think we need to clarify a few things. I could feel my frustration rising. You don't need to clarify anything, I said sharply. You agreed to the changes. What else is there to discuss? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her searching for the right words. Olivia, this isn't easy for us. You have to understand that this family has traditions. We've always done things a certain way. And that's exactly the problem, Margaret, I said, my voice firm. Your traditions have been keeping us out for years. But you need to accept that this is our family now. This isn't just about the money or the trust. It's about respect. I respect you, Margaret said, though her tone didn't sound convincing. But you have to understand that Sophia is not. Well, she's not really. Stop right there, I cut her off. I don't want to hear any more about what she is and isn't. Sophia's family. She's my daughter, and she's just as much a part of this family as anyone else. If you can't accept that, then there's nothing left to discuss. Margaret's silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I waited for her to speak, but she didn't. After a long moment, she finally sighed. Fine, she said, her voice resigned. We'll make it official. But I want you to know that it's not just about Sophia. It's about how things have always been, and I can't just erase that overnight. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my voice calm. You're right. It's not just about Sophia. It's about all of us. And I'm not going to keep playing this game. If you want to be part of our lives, you have to treat us like family. No more excuses. There was another long pause before Margaret spoke again, her voice softer. I understand. But this is going to take time. Time is something we don't have anymore, Margaret, I said, the words sharp and final. If you truly want to be part of Sophia's life, you need to prove it. Not with words, but with actions. I hung up the phone, my heart still racing. I had done it. I had laid down the law. Now it was up to Margaret and Edward to either accept it or face the consequences. I could feel a sense of relief wash over me, but I knew that the real work was just beginning. I had set the boundaries. Now I had to make sure they were enforced. Jake came home shortly after the call, and I could tell from the look on his face that he knew something had changed. How did it go? He asked, his voice cautious. I looked at him, my gaze unwavering. It went. But this isn't over. I've made it clear that things need to change. And if they don't, we walk away. I'm done trying to fit into a family that doesn't want us. Jake didn't say anything at first. He just stood there staring at me. I could see the internal struggle in his eyes, the battle between his loyalty to his family and his commitment to me and Sophia. Finally, he nodded slowly. I'm with you, he said quietly. I'm not going to let them keep hurting you or Sophia. I'll stand by you. Always. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but there was still a long way to go. I couldn't rest yet. I had to be prepared for whatever came next, for the next challenge that would inevitably arise. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally on the same page. Together, we were ready to face whatever came our way. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Margaret. Not of Edward. And certainly not of the future. We had our family. And that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed the confrontation with Margaret and Edward felt like a delicate balance between progress and uncertainty. While they had agreed to make changes to the trust, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were only doing it because they had no other choice. The change wasn't a guarantee that everything would be okay. It was just a start. I couldn't trust them completely, not yet. But it was the first step. And now I had to make sure that Jake and I continued to move forward with our lives, no matter what happened. The tension between us was still there, but it was different now. Jake was trying. I could see it in the way he had started to speak up more, in the way he looked at me when we talked about the future. But it wasn't enough yet. I needed him to understand that we couldn't keep pretending things were okay. Not when Sophia was still being treated like an outsider by his family. I needed him to see that standing up for her meant standing up for us. It wasn't just about the money or the inheritance anymore. It was about creating a future where we didn't have to keep defending our right to exist in this family. It was about making sure Sophia knew that she was loved, that she was a part of something, that she mattered. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid to confront the hard truths, and I wasn't afraid to fight for what was right. Jake and I spent more time talking in the weeks that followed. There were still awkward moments, still some tension. But there were also moments of connection, of understanding. Slowly Jake began to see what I had been trying to tell him for so long. He began to see that it wasn't just about his family, it was about us. It was about our family. One evening, as we sat on the couch after dinner, Jake turned to me, his expression serious. "Olivia," he said quietly, "I've been thinking. I know I haven't been perfect. I know I've been hesitant to fully stand up to my parents. But I see now how much this has hurt you. How much it's hurt Sophia." My heart swelled with a mixture of relief and hope. "Jake, it's not just about the past. It's about the future. We have to make sure this never happens again. We have to make sure that Sophia knows she belongs." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I agree. And I want you to know that I'm with you. I'm going to make sure my parents understand that we won't tolerate this anymore." I could feel the weight of his words, and for the first time I truly believed he meant it. "Thank you," I said softly. "That's all I've ever wanted. To know that you're with me. That we're in this together." The next day, Jake went to see his parents. I didn't know exactly what was said, but when he came back, I could tell something had changed. His face was calmer, more resolved. "I talked to them," he said quietly. "And they agreed to make things right. They're not thrilled about it, but they're going to include Sophia in the will. They'll make sure she's taken care of." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I had hoped for. But it was something. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally starting to move in the right direction. There were still things to work through, still deep-rooted issues in Jake's family that needed to be addressed. But we had taken a major step forward. And for now that was enough. We continued to live our lives focusing on what truly mattered. Sophia, our daughter, our future. But the situation with Margaret and Edward wasn't entirely behind us. As much as I had hoped that things would get better, I knew we had to stay vigilant. I couldn't just let things slide back to how they had been before. The moment I let my guard down, the moment I allowed myself to believe that everything was fixed, was the moment I risked losing everything. So I kept fighting. Not just for Sophia, but for our family, for the life we wanted to build together. One afternoon, about a week after the conversation with Jake's parents, we received a letter in the mail. It was from the lawyer who had been handling the revisions to the trust. I opened it with shaking hands, not sure what to expect. The letter was formal, but the words inside made my heart race. "The revisions have been finalized," it read. "Sophia is now included as a beneficiary of the trust. All assets that were previously designated solely for Edward and Margaret's biological children have been divided equally among all grandchildren, including Sophia." It wasn't the complete victory I had hoped for. There were still stipulations and clauses that I didn't fully understand, but it was a start. It was proof that our voices had been heard. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. Jake and I talked about it that evening, and while we were both still processing the legalities, there was a sense of peace between us. We had done it. We had fought for what was right, and we had won. It wasn't perfect, and there would be more challenges ahead, But we had proven that standing up for our family was worth it. We had proven that we were a family no matter what anyone else said. And as I looked at Jake and Sophia, I knew that we had finally created the life we deserved. It was a life where we didn't have to keep fighting for our place in the world. A life where we could be ourselves without fear or hesitation. A life where we knew that we belonged. The following weeks were a quiet but tense mix of small victories and lingering doubts. The legal changes to the trust had been made, and although it was far from a perfect resolution, it was something. Sophia was officially included now, and for the first time I felt like we were finally being recognized. But as much as I tried to let go of the weight of the situation, it still lingered in the air between us. I kept wondering, was it really over? Could things go back to normal? Or would there always be this invisible wall between us and Jake's family? I wanted to believe that everything would get better now, that the confrontation had been the turning point we needed. But every time I looked at Jake, I could see the strain in his eyes. He wasn't completely at peace with the situation. He wasn't fully ready to cut ties with his parents, even though he had agreed to stand up for us. I knew he was torn. He didn't want to lose his family, but I also knew he couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. We couldn't go on like this. It had been a long time coming, but it felt like the tension was still there, beneath the surface, ready to boil over at any moment. And then one evening it did. We were sitting at the dinner table, Jake and I, with Sophia between us, talking about her school project. For a brief moment, everything felt normal, but I could tell something was off. Jake was distant, lost in his thoughts. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth, but he didn't seem to notice. I cleared my throat, my voice hesitant at first. Jake. He looked up, startled. What's on your mind? I asked, the weight of the question hanging in the air. He hesitated, setting his fork down and leaning back in his chair. His eyes met mine, filled with guilt and uncertainty. I've been thinking about what you said, about how I need to stand up for us, for you and Sophia. And I know I said I'd do it, but I'm not sure how. My heart sank. I had known this moment was coming, but hearing him say it out loud still stung. I had hoped that the confrontation with his parents would have been enough to push him forward, but I was wrong. Jake, this isn't just about the trust or the money. This is about us, about our family. If you can't stand up for us, for Sophia, then what are we doing? We're not just some afterthought. We're your family too. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. I don't want to lose my family. I've spent my whole life trying to keep things together. But I don't want to lose you and Sophia either. The words were there, but they didn't seem to bring the clarity I was hoping for. I knew he was struggling with the idea of severing ties with his parents. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the fear of what would happen if he truly chose us over them. Jake, you can't keep trying to please everyone. This isn't about pleasing anyone. This is about doing what's right. For you. For me. For Sophia. I felt the frustration rising in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. You can't keep living like this, trying to keep both sides happy. You need to decide where you stand. There was a long silence, the weight of the conversation pressing down on us both. I could see Jake's eyes flickering with doubt, but there was something else there now too, something I hadn't seen before. He wasn't just passive anymore. He was truly thinking. I don't know if I'm ready to cut ties completely, but I know I can't keep going on like this, he said, his voice filled with resolve. I'll stand up for you and Sophia. I won't let them treat us like this anymore. We deserve better. My heart swelled with relief, but I knew it wasn't the end of the story. We still had so much to work through, so many conversations to have. But for the first time I felt like Jake was truly on our side. For the first time I felt like we could move forward together. The next few days were filled with more difficult conversations, but this time Jake was different. He was more involved, more present. He spent time with Sophia, talking to her, reassuring her that things were going to get better. And slowly I started to see the change in him, the way he began to prioritize our family over everything else. I didn't know if it would last, but I had to trust that we were making progress. And then one evening, Jake received a call from his parents. He had been dreading it for days, knowing that this conversation was inevitable. I watched him as he answered, his face tight with apprehension. Hello, he said, his voice guarded. Jake, Margaret's voice came through, colder than usual. I think we need to talk. He listened intently, his expression shifting from frustration to concern. I could barely hear Margaret's words, but I could tell by the tone of her voice that she wasn't giving up easily. I stayed quiet, watching Jake as he nodded along to whatever she was saying. After a few minutes he finally spoke. I've already told you what I need, Margaret. I've already told you how things need to change. We can't go back to how things were. This isn't just about the trust anymore. This is about treating my family with respect. There was another long pause on the other end of the line, and then Margaret's voice came back, softer but still resistant. I understand that, Jake. But I don't think you fully understand the implications of this. It's not just about you and Olivia. It's about everything we've built. Jake sighed, his shoulders sagging as he looked over at me. I understand that. But this is our family now, and I won't let anyone disrespect that. The call ended shortly after, and Jake turned to me, his face filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. They're not happy, he said quietly, but they're willing to make some changes. It's not perfect, but it's a start. I nodded, the weight of the moment settling over me. It's something, I said. But we're not done yet. We need to keep pushing. For Sophia. For us. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation hanging between us. But for the first time I felt like we were finally moving forward. It wasn't perfect, but we were in this together. And that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed felt like a new chapter. One that was still being written with every decision Jake and I made. We had been making progress, but I knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The call from his parents was a turning point, but it wasn't the final resolution. I still had a lingering unease, a feeling that there was more to be done. Jake had taken a stand, but the real test was yet to come. We had changed the trust and we had set boundaries, but now we had to enforce them. And that meant standing firm no matter what. As the days went on, I found myself more focused on making sure Sophia felt the love and security she deserved. She still didn't understand the full scope of what had happened, and I didn't want to burden her with the weight of it all, but I couldn't ignore the way her confidence had been shaken. The way she still hesitated when she saw Margaret and Edward. The way she still questioned whether she truly belonged. That was the hardest part, the emotional toll. I couldn't undo what they had done, but I could make sure that she grew up knowing that she was enough. That she was loved. The conversation with Jake after the call with his parents had been quiet, but I could see the relief in his eyes. He was still processing, still unsure of how everything would play out, but he was with me. He was finally on our side, and that meant everything. I know it's not perfect, he said one evening as we sat together, the quiet of the night wrapping around us. But I'm trying. I'm trying to make it right. I took his hand, squeezing it gently. I know. I see it. And that's all I need from you. I paused, then looked at him. But we can't stop here. We need to keep pushing. We need to keep making sure that they understand what they've done, and what we're asking for. Jake nodded, his brow furrowed with determination. I'll keep doing whatever I can. I won't let them hurt you or Sophia again. That was the moment I realized how far we had come. Not just in our fight with his parents, but in our relationship, in the way we were working together. It hadn't been easy, but we were finally on the same page. The next step was to hold Margaret and Edward accountable. I knew that I couldn't let them off the hook just because they had agreed to make changes to the trust. The respect we were asking for needed to be shown through actions, not just words. So I called them again. This time I was clear. I wasn't going to accept any more empty promises. We need to meet, I said when Margaret answered. We need to talk about the changes you've made to the trust, and how things will be moving forward. There was hesitation on the other end of the line, but Margaret agreed to meet. When we arrived at their house, I could see the tension in their eyes. They knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. As we sat down, I looked straight at Margaret and Edward. I want to make it clear that we're not just doing this for the money, I said, my voice steady but firm. We're doing this because we deserve to be treated with respect. Sophia deserves to be treated like family, not like some outsider. Margaret's face was tight, her lips pressed into a thin line. Edward was quiet, his gaze fixed on the floor. I could tell they didn't like being called out, but I wasn't backing down. The changes to the trust are a step in the right direction, I continued. But we need to see more. We need to see that you're truly committed to including us. To making sure Sophia is never made to feel like she doesn't belong. We're not going to settle for anything less. There was silence in the room, the weight of my words hanging heavily between us. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice softer than before. I don't know if we'll ever be able to make up for what's happened, Olivia, she said quietly. But we'll try. We'll do better. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I believed her. Trying isn't enough anymore. We need actions, not just words. Edward finally spoke up, his voice low. We've been through a lot, Olivia. This family has been through a lot. But I understand now that we need to make changes. We'll revise the trust again. We'll include Sophia fully. No more exceptions. I felt a mix of relief and skepticism wash over me. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I appreciate that, I said, my voice steady. But it's not just about the money. It's about respect. It's about making sure Sophia feels like she belongs. And if you can't do that, then there's nothing else to discuss. The conversation ended shortly after, with some final agreements made. But I couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from over. This wasn't the kind of family I had hoped for. It wasn't the kind of family I had dreamed about when I married Jake. But we had made progress. We had moved the needle, even if only a little. And that was enough for now. When we left their house, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I wasn't sure where we stood with Margaret and Edward, but I knew one thing for sure. We were moving forward. Slowly but surely we were getting closer to the life we wanted. A life where we didn't have to keep defending our place, where we didn't have to fight for the respect we deserved. A life where Sophia could grow up knowing that she was loved, accepted, and worthy of every good thing that came her way. I looked at Jake as we drove home, his face more relaxed than I had seen in a long time. We weren't done with this fight, but for the first time in a while I felt like we were finally on the same side. We had our family and we were going to protect it no matter what.